So welcome everyone to the T1 section, shared experience and lessons learned during the pandemic, preparing the unexpected. I think is a very rather topic since the times we are living and unfortunately which we will live in the near future. So I'll start the presentation now of the logistics. Here you go. So you have three main teams on this conference, but probably you have been aware of them. So the program committee has developed this program in a very short time just to cover the hot topics of pharmacy. And here you have the cornerstone of all the programming of this event. Well, regarding the logistics, probably you have gone through this, but it's compulsory, you need to go through it. So you use the statements and declarations from the speakers and chairs to evaluate any conflict of interest, and no conflict of interest was detected for this session. Make sure that you evaluate this session. That's very important because your feedback will be essential for us to improve and to actually fulfill your expectations in future events. You can ask any questions at Q&A. Shortly, I will introduce you the program. There was a slight change, but then we'll have time for some questions and answers from our speakers. So just wait for the end of the session just to address them to all of the ladies that are here with me today. Well, I just kind of remind you that no recording of the session is allowed. Well, you may not download speaker slides at the end of the session. Anyway, if the speakers approve it, you will be able to have access to the presentations. Then, well, I kindly ask you as well just to use the hashtags and to promote the FIP event on the social media accounts. And then, please at the end, just be sure that you don't leave any belongings at the room. So I would like also to emphasize that in roughly 1 year time, FIP will fly to Australia. So that will be an opportunity to update what have you learned during this conference and hopefully as well to share some of your expertise as a speaker or as a member of one of the workshops. I would also like to emphasize this is World Pharmacy Week. We kindly invite you all just to go to the FIP website to download an image of a background just to use and to promote the World Pharmacy Week through your social media accounts. So again, thank you for coming for the session. And on FIP, we are firm believers of the motto, practice what you preach. So for this session focusing on the preparedness for the unexpected, we had our own unexpected event since our WHO speaker was not able to travel and join us today. However, fear not, we learned from experience during the last few months, and we were able to have with us another high-level speaker who will share her experience on this topic. So here you have the new program. So we will start with Professor Wanda Maldonado, then we move to Professor Kimberly Washington, and at the end, I will have some assistants here as well, just to run the Q&A, and hopefully we'll finish the session at 12:30. So I will start by introducing the first speaker, that's Professor Wanda Maldonado. She's a Dean and Professor at University of Puerto Rico School of Pharmacy. She earned both her BS in Pharmacy and Doctor in Pharmacy degrees from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. Her research interests in academia include the development of professional and general abilities in pharmacy students and curriculum development. Her research and practice interests in the clinical settings include the therapeutics of anti-infective agents. Dr. Maldonado has collaborated actively with the Conferencia Iberoamericana de Facultad de Farmacia since 2010, when she has participated in educational programs in the Central and South American region. She has also collaborated extensively with the Pan American Health Organization. Thank you so much, Wanda, for coming with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Luis. Thanks for FIP's invitation to share with you some of what we have done at the University of Puerto Rico responding to unexpected events. As Luis mentioned, we are going to dig in today into unexpected events related to COVID, but also it's very timely that we also address unexpected natural disasters. As we speak, I am responding to a natural disaster in Puerto Rico as we were hit by tropical storm that turned into Hurricane Fiona just last Sunday. So we're in the middle of that. Luckily, from previous events, like the one I'm going to share with you today, we have learned a lot in terms of how to prepare at this time of the year for these issues that are very, very recurrent at this time of the year. And also our response has become very, very swift. We know how to handle now, since the massive event we had in 2017, Hurricane Maria, I doubt that I will see anything as dramatic as that in my lifetime, and I hope so. I hope I don't get to see something like that again. I'm going to share with you some ideas that you can implement in your scenarios. It doesn't have to be a hurricane. It can be earthquake. It can be tornadoes, because it's all about preparing and responding. And one of the main aspects is communication, communication, communication. The key to responding to these unexpected events is communication. And it's a communication that happens at all levels, from the faculty side, with the students, with the staff, with the public in general, through the press, everything. So we're going to get into some of those issues right now. Okay. So this is what we're going to be addressing, natural disasters and going forward. And as you can see, Puerto Rico is in the center of the Caribbean, just north of South America, south of the North America, east of Central America, and west of the hurricane factory that is located in Cabo Verde. So that's a very remarkable fact, because those hurricanes originate in Cabo Verde, east of us, in the tip of Africa, of the African continent, and that's how they make their way to the Caribbean, at least the ones that are, formed in the Atlantic. So as you can see, we can be very vulnerable to these atmospheric events. I'm not sure that, I'm not an expert on climate change, but I can tell you one thing. I was born in Puerto Rico, I grew up in Puerto Rico, and in 30 years, I never saw a hurricane go by. After I moved to Puerto Rico in 1986, I have seen already 3 or 4 of these phenomena. So certainly there's something happening with atmospheric events. I don't know why they're apparently more common now in our area. I don't know if there's anything related to climate change, but there it is, and it's a reality for us, and we have to deal with it. The University of Puerto Rico School of Pharmacy is located at the Medical Sciences campus, and we're lucky enough that we have other 5 professional schools. So as you can tell, we have the ecosystem for collaboration with other health professions, which makes also the interprofessional education and collaboration very amenable to our program. So that's one of the assets of our campus, that we can collaborate with these other. And as a matter of fact, one of the ways we responded, as I also want to relate to you in the Q&A section, how we responded to COVID. And Kim will share with you her experience, and then we can explain more in the Q&A. We developed an interprofessional education venture. We established a COVID vaccination center at the campus, and that became a feature for interprofessional education. So anyway, this is an image of Hurricane Maria as it was going through Puerto Rico. As you can see, the island is only 100 miles by 35, and the image of the hurricane is just a massive, massive event that just went through the island. And damage control for us, very important. This is a publication by the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, Academic Pharmacy now. They did a feature on our response to the hurricane. And our ability to respond and to make sure that our programs, academic programs, continue to happen in a successful way was very important. Not only we were hit with Maria, we were hit by Hurricane Irma 2 weeks before. So we were hit in 2017 by Hurricane Irma in September 6th, and then in September 20th, we already have another second hurricane, which was Hurricane Maria. And this was a Category 5 hurricane, something as massive as I have never seen before. So our response, and the pharmacy profession was also key. When these events happen, there's a societal need that goes far beyond just education, the professionals, etc. Everybody needs to get back on their feet. So the response by all health professionals is very important, because us health professionals, we don't take vacations, and we don't have the luxury of staying at home. Even when the hurricane comes by, okay, we stay at home the day of the hurricane, but after that, all health professionals are out there providing services, because patients will have needs, and society in general. So healthcare professionals were key. Pharmacists were key in the response. And just 2 days ago, as I was about to travel to Sevilla, we were hit again by tropical storm, which later turned into Hurricane Fiona. When it passed by the corner of the island, up there in the map, it was Hurricane Category 1. Now today it's already Category 3. As you can see, this is a sample of the damage done just in a day of the hurricane going by. Extensive flooding, loss of crops, slides everywhere. Especially in the southern part of the island of Puerto Rico. So certainly it's a response that we're going through right now. One of the issues is that the loss of power. We don't know how many people will be without power for how long. For example, during Hurricane Maria, I was without power for 3 months, exactly 3 months. Luckily, I had an electric generator at home. But that's one of the unknowns that we have to be very sensitive with our students and staff and our faculty when we come back to work. So as an academic institution that is accredited, our program is accredited by Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education, I always wonder about this standard. Every time I looked at this standard when we were doing self-studies for accreditation, it's like, how can we make sure that we don't go into assistance failure, technical failure, curricular failure? And when we were hit with Hurricane Maria, as we were hit now with Hurricane Fiona, our campus is fine. The building of the School of Pharmacy is fine. As a matter of fact, we have power back again and water service. However, what worries us the most, what keeps me up at night, is a curricular failure. We want to make sure that our students are able to complete their academic activities on time, all the students in all the years of the program, because we have a responsibility to them. Even though we're hit with a hurricane, we have to do whatever we have to do to make sure that the students completely success their academic programs on time. So we always make sure that we have the IT infrastructure secure, that technical part. We know that the administrative side of it will be okay, but we want to make sure that our academic activities, which are our utmost responsibility to our students, are also taken care of. And it all comes down to the fact that when you have a hurricane, at least you have 3 days to prepare, 2 or 3. And I say at least because that's different from a tornado, right? Or an earthquake where you cannot prepare. But at least for a hurricane, at least we have enough forecast systems that, it says, well, maybe in 2 days you will be hit. And that's when the preparation starts. And it has to be very quick, swift, efficient. This is for Hurricane Maria. This is a meeting with our chancellor and the deans of the campus. We're all there. That was that Monday before Maria hit us. Maria hit us on a Wednesday. September 20th, as a matter of fact, 5 years ago today. Today is September 20th. So this is us getting ready. For this, you have to get everybody on campus on board. Is the persons who are responsible for your infrastructure, administration, the dean of administration, everybody, the security people have to be on board, the deans of all the schools. And the communication needs to happen so we can prepare and communicate what the plan will be to all our stakeholders. And then we have to remember that we don't work isolated from the University of Puerto Rico system. We have to make sure that in our campus we wait for the president of the university to communicate what will be the plan and the decision making, that the campus makes the decisions, and the deans obviously take those communications to the respective schools. In our case, it's the dean taking those plans to the faculty, students, and staff. And the other portion of it is that we have to remember that we are preparing at work, but then we all have to go to our homes and prepare for an event that we don't know what the end result will be in our homes. So we have to be very empathic to our staff, faculty, and students, and let them go ahead of time with enough time so that they can buy supplies, waters, etc., diesel for the generators, and they can be safe at home before the event starts. So that anticipation of making sure that everybody goes to where they have to go in their homes and prepare and help their families to get everything they need to brace for the storm is very important. And this ended up being the trajectory for Maria for us. We were hit right, through the middle of the island. It was very devastating. It was a Category 5. And when you look at our pharmacy students, they're not clustered just in the San Juan metro area. As you can see here, every pin is where we have students. So it means that in our program, in Doctor of Pharmacy program, we have students from just about every little township in the island. And that means that we have to be very sensitive to that and to what has happened in those areas where they live and what their situations are with their families. So that's why we need to make sure that they can be home safely with enough anticipation. So what was the timeline for us? Like I said, the president of the university notified the cancellation of classes from that Monday. Then our chancellor said that we will be on Monday in the clinics until noon. The dean communicated to students that they needed to start making arrangements. We had classes until that Monday. We have to make sure that on Tuesday, everybody was at home, and very important, the paycheck was made available to everybody that Tuesday ahead of time, right? Because everybody has to go and buy everything they need out of their, unforeseen budget for supplies, etc. So that also was something that was arranged. It may seem like, something not related to it, very much related. You have to make sure that, before people go, they also have what they deserve, which is a paycheck. And then we're hit with the hurricane on that Wednesday, September 20th, a day like today. This is the type of preparations that we do. We have to make sure that nothing is around the windows in our offices or our, belongings, documents. We have to make sure that our labs, our research labs, are secure as well. We have faculty in our school who have productive research, so the laboratory space also have to be secure besides the office spaces. There's a logistics in terms of which researchers when will be able to access the laboratories, because when the power is gone, our security does not allow people in the buildings for security reasons. So there's an inventory of research spaces, who are the investigators, who is allowed to go in when with, with somebody from security beside them. And there's there's a protocol for access to those laboratories on the aftermath of the event. So, we are a tropical island. And this is a landscape I found in front of our school that Friday when I went for the first reconnaissance visit to our school. The school is there in the background. The building didn't suffer any damage, but look at all the vegetation. It looks like a winter landscape. So we didn't have any structural damage to the school, no damage to the research laboratories, no floodings, and no apparent damage to the infrastructure, to the IT infrastructure. As a matter of fact, everything worked out well for us. So we had that building was inaugurated in 2012, and it really made the passed the test with the hurricane. The only thing we lost was a lamp here you see on the left, but nothing major. This, on the other hand, is my backyard. There's supposed to be a swimming pool there somewhere. And I forget it. When I look at these pictures now, if you go to my backyard now, you will never know that had happened. Looks like a Halloween scene. So that was the path of the hurricane. It went through the island right across. It really was very damaging because of that reason. And then when you start responding, you immediately have to understand who needs to know what is going on and that you're okay. To me, the first in my mind was the accreditation agency, that the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education, I needed to tell them right away that we were standing and that we were ready to go ahead with identifying when we would be resuming academic activities. So I had a communication with our liaison with ACPE on that a week later, the Wednesday, the 27th. The 28th, as you can imagine, we have students who are in their 4th year of the program. Those are the candidates for graduation. Those are the students who are doing advanced experiential education rotations. And those were really the students that I had, in my heart as the priority, because we wanted them to graduate that year on time. So we gathered them outside of the building. We couldn't go into the building because the building was not powered yet, and they wouldn't let us in. So at the lobby of the building, I gathered 4-year students, and I asked them to write down their plans for the advanced practice rotations, and asked them if they would be willing to relocate the rotations, specifically to sites in the mainland US where we had affiliation agreements with other schools of pharmacy, as we had begun doing that for some years before the hurricane. So just to show that sometimes you do things because you think it's a good idea, like establishing memorandum of understandings with other institutions, because you think it's a good idea that a student that was born and raised in Puerto Rico all their life has a chance to do a practice somewhere else at some point in their life. And then that paid off because we had that opportunity to place those students in other sites at that time of need. So we started doing that. On October the 2nd, we had the power back in our building, as well as water and the internet. Faculty and staff resumed their activities on October the 2nd, and Monday, October 9th, all activities, academic activities were resumed, and we communicated that to our accreditation agency at that point. Needless to say, we resumed activities that day, but we knew we would have power outages sporadically because as other areas are connected in the grid, at some points we may lose power. So we had to identify strategies to communicate to students that even though we might lose powers momentarily at certain points, that it would continue with our academic activities. This is a type of information I was gathering from the students that day that I met with them at the lobby at the school. If you can tell here, one of them said, "My uncle lives in Boston. I can go there to any of the peers, do a rotation." And that's the type of information we were getting, what they were supposed to do, if they were willing to relocate. We started looking for places to relocate the students that we needed to do so. An advantage of having, if there's only one advantage of having a hurricane on the month of September, is that it's the beginning of the academic year. So it gives you time to create the contingencies, because you have 10 months worth of rotations, and this is just the first month. So it gives you some latitude to be able to plan for that contingency. And so the success in relocating students was due to many things. One, that we have an existence of preview MOUs with other institutions, the development of new ones, that, like I said, that happened at the beginning of the academic year. The willingness of a great number of schools and colleges of pharmacies to give us a hand. The schools and colleges of pharmacies in the US were so generous with us, and they were so supportive. They really gave us a hand with these students. Obviously, the willingness of faculty to receive these students in their practice sites, and the willingness of the students to relocate was also important. You needed to have students who were willing to relocate so we could help them out. Let me show you something. Just before the hurricane, we had already 16 students doing 20 APIs in the mainland US. So it was a good thing that we already have those 16 students on board. That increased to 20 students, but the number of APIs that were done in the mainland were increased significantly, more than doubled, from 20 to 43, and that was very significant, so those students were able to complete those rotations. That's for the practice sites. For the calendar and the academic years, the academic activities, we had to make sure that we were complying with our credit hours in the courses. So each course coordinator presented a plan to the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs in terms of if there needed to be some lecturing, additional lecturing for some courses, extending some class hours during the weekdays, revision of holidays observed. We got rid pretty much of any other holiday that we were supposed to have before Christmas, except for Thanksgiving. The semester ended up being extended, but just for about a week. So it means that we were able to catch up with other strategies. There were many challenges at the institutional level. This is, the lobby of the School of Pharmacy had a flip chart now with that's my handwriting, saying we have a faculty meeting on day such and such. If power is out, we still are going to have classes. And it's a tricky situation when you have a campus when there are 5 other professional schools, when each one of them may be making different decisions in terms of how they handle their academic activities. And we assure them that the decisions for our programs were made at the school. And others, although other programs may be making other decisions, we had to maintain our academic programs going and supporting them in that way. Obviously, we had a backup generator at the school that did not kick in at the beginning, then that was fixed. We had to create contingency for power outages, for water. If we didn't have power, we didn't have water, and that means that you had to think about the bathrooms and what other strategies we had to implement. The communications, the IT infrastructure was not affected, but in our homes, most people did not have internet in their homes. So the School of Pharmacy also became a focal point for them to go in and get connected. So we had to revise the hours that we would have the students on campus. We didn't want them to be there too late in the evening, because if there was, it was dark outside, we didn't want students to be leaving there at 2 in the morning. But we provided them with the space to be there to be able to study and do other activities, academic activities. And we reminded the students that if we were to have a power outage, I'm old enough that I know how to lecture a cappella. And many of you know that we don't need PowerPoint all the time. We can really engage in academic activities even if we have if the power is off. At home, the challenges at home go in parallel with the challenges in our academic institutions. So we have two lives. It's like, what do I have to solve at work or for the students? a school with academic program, and then what's going on at home? Do we have water? Do we have power? Many people did not have power for months. And some people have generators, some people did not have generators. So the contingencies on how to get supplies, the lines in the supermarkets were humongous. It was like lines and lines of all the time in the gas stations, the lines at the gas station, the lines to get diesel, to get gas. And these people have, many of them helped in their homes to secure all those things. There was no TV station broadcasting when Maria left us. It was just one radio station broadcasting. So many people did not know what was going on except for, through the grapevine. Many people were left without cell phone communication. People have done away with the landlines from their phones. I still had a landline in my home. I had an old phone that I put in the landline that does not depend on the powers that went back there. So that was also a contingency to look for. Traffic lights. Imagine going through rush hour with no traffic lights working. That was another challenge. You wanted people to be sure. We also created support for the students at the campus level. The deanship of students, the Department of Psychiatry of the School of Medicine created clinics for the faculty, staff, or students who needed support for the mental health. Right now, I received a notice yesterday that the clinic from the School of Medicine, the Department of Psychiatry, was activated again because of the recent passing of Hurricane Fiona. So the support to the students is very important, to faculty and staff. And then students just turned the page and they became supporters of others. We started doing clinics, remote clinics. A lot of people donated medications and they asked us to set up makeshift pharmacies in certain parishes, churches, community centers, hospitals, ambulatory care clinics. So this is a sample of one of our faculty members there with a group of students. Actually, they made a makeshift pharmacy, and that became a practice site for some of the students. We also received patients from the smaller islands after the Hurricane Irma hit them, and we provided support for them. We were also in efforts with the Department of Health and the Puerto Rico Pharmaceutical Industry Association because we wanted patients to remember to take their medications, to not let the medications go on ignore that they had to keep on taking the medications. We obviously were in the news, really educating the public regarding their medication, how to say them, how to use them, how to access them. We had several communications, this one at the Journal of APHA, about our response to the hurricane, another one in the Annals of Pharmacotherapy on the lessons learned from the pharmacist perspective. And like I said, pharmacists were really key to the response. The students, we provided meal drives for the students. This is a donation of meals that we received at the school, and we distributed it to our students. The students also made a drug distribution center at the University Pediatric Hospital. They collaborated with the pediatric hospital. There were community clinics, like I said, everywhere, in churches, parishes, community centers. This is one of our students verifying medications with one of the patients in one of the centers. This is another clinic led by the gentleman here in the back is the physician leading the effort there in one of the churches, and this right here is one of our students taking care of a patient. And the community pharmacy residency program received a grant to do support clinics, interdisciplinary patient care outreach clinics. And this is a clinic done by the director of the residency program here In that clinic, we had 2 pharmacists, a physician, and 2 nurses go to this remote area where access to services was practically non-existent. This is in my hometown. And so this became a clinic that went around the island with interdisciplinary effort from our campus. Back in our program, obviously, we had to still think of other things that needed to get done, like the process of admission for students for the upcoming year. And usually our deadline for application was on December 1st. We moved to January 31st. The students who needed to take the PCAT, which is a standardized test that was requirement for our program, it moved from October to January because there were no testing sites for the PCAT in the island. And there were also some interviews and admissions that were only a week later than the year before the hurricane. And finishing up, lessons learned, we learned many lessons in our campus. Like we need to have satellite phones instead of just radio transmitters for the leadership team at the campus. We recommended that the Puerto Rico emergency response director belong to our response effort. We established more and more powerful radio telephone antennas connected to the campus. The switchboard of the campus is connected now to a backup generator. We installed portable water towels. The gasoline distribution is being arranged for clinical personnel because physicians, pharmacists, etc., they need to go, residents, to keep going to the sites. So, you know, to having a secure place for them to get gasoline close to campus was also important. Improve logistics for communication, new extraction towers. This is very important. If you have a research facility, your extraction towers must be secure because otherwise your hoods cannot be used safely. So that's something that needs to be also thought about. Improved use of backup generators and water cisterns in the building was also improved. In our building, now the generator comes up when we have power outages, and the cistern for the water also kicks in. I need to thank and acknowledge all the other schools of pharmacy who gave us a hand during this period. They're all listed here. Without them, we couldn't have finished the year successfully, especially for our graduates, fourth-year students. And also the pharmacies, obviously, they really handed a lesson in the community pharmacies in terms of the job they did for drug distribution, flexibility in the work hours, the energy redundancy that most of them had generators, the services to patients and to other health professionals as well. The one last thing I have to say is that I just received last night another notice from the Department of Health, and when this happened with Maria, the flexibility in terms of how medications are refilled, etc., was introduced. Last night I received notice again that flexibility for prescribing drugs for chronic illnesses, maintenance drug, has also started to kick in. And with that, I will leave you, and thanks for your attention, and look forward to questions in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Jules, first of all, congratulations to all the staff, both academic, also the students, for all the work that you have done. It is, I think, Wanda has mirrored some challenges most of us have lived over the past 2 years in different contexts, for sure. But in a way, it's a sort of a warning, like when you mentioned that all this issue that you're dealing with natural disasters actually started on the other side of the Atlantic. So it means that probably, and you have seen the news, that's something that will come up sooner or later, because definitely there's been some changes on climate. This idea of communication, preparedness, also and the supervision. There was an interesting point I would like to sum up the budget part, because you should budget the unexpected. So that's very important, because most of us are involved in organizations one way or the other. So that's something very interesting to see. And at the same time, you go back to lecturing a cappella, wasn't it? internet and to use landlines, but at the same time you need to have satellite phones. So it's like, well, back to the future and back to the past. So definitely need to think thoroughly about our own jurisdictions, our own institutions, because, well, we need to prepare for the unexpected. So thank you so much, Wanda. I'm looking forward to the Q&A. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. So Kim has kindly volunteered to deal with the unexpected absence of our speaker. So on behalf of FIP, I'll thank you for your availability. So I'll just give you the floor to you. So Kimberly McKiernan is the Associate Professor and University at the Center for Pharmacy Practice Research at the Washington State University. She has been receiving several grants for improving immunization rates in rural areas, developing a model for implementing chronic disease state management services in rural community pharmacies, and developing a pharmacy technician immunization training programs, amongst other activities. So Kim will focus on lessons learned about telehealth. Thank you so much, Kim. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm Kim McKernan. It's my unexpected pleasure to be here with you today, but it's a great opportunity to talk about telehealth and some research that I've done recently that I hope will be applicable to you in your pharmacy practice as well. I do not have any conflicts of interest to report. So I guess a good place to start maybe, what is telehealth? So this is communication using electronic and information technologies when the patient and the provider, and often that's a pharmacist, cannot be in the same place at the same time. So this traditionally has been, over time conducted over telephone, but with such great modalities that we've been using for video communication, often that's the way this is done these days. But it's a wonderful way for patients and their providers to connect with each other. So this actually was something that was done in pharmacy practice in many areas of ambulatory care before the pandemic. And I've added some citations in here that I'll share with you at the end if you're interested in learning more about this. But the first documented in the literature, telehealth, was actually more than 20 years ago. So this is maybe new to many of us, but it's not new to everyone. So what are some benefits of having telehealth visits with our patients? Well, one, it can increase the continuity of care. So if there's a provider seeing a patient because they're, in an institution or a hospital, and then the patient goes back to their home, rather than having to, immediately switch providers, they could potentially communicate with the same person even over distance. It's also a great way to support patients who have chronic conditions that they're doing a pretty good job of managing, but they still need, we need to check in with them routinely. We found that this was really a good way to manage hypertension, for example. So if you have a patient who has had hypertension for years, they're pretty stable on their medication, but you still need to regularly check in with them and see how they're doing with their health, how they're doing with their blood pressure. It's a great way to do that. This has also been a wonderful tool to overcome provider shortages. In the area where I live and grew up and practice, we have many communities that are an hour, sometimes two, from any kind of medical care. Lots of patients who really just struggle to have access. And we've also, over time, seen some struggles to get physicians and pharmacists who want to live in those communities kind of long term. So it's been quite a problem, and telehealth is a great way to bridge that. It also overcomes the travel burden, which often falls on the patient. So for patients who have, lower income, maybe difficulties with transportation, patients where I live, we mostly speak English, and so patients who do not speak English and have trouble getting a translator or family member to come interpret for them, telehealth can be really a great tool for that as well, reducing that burden on the patient. But of course, with benefits also come quite a few challenges, and I'm sure you can already picture what a few of these are. So first, if I'm having a telehealth visit with my patient, I cannot do any sort of really robust physical examination of them. I cannot draw blood and do laboratory values, and I really can't directly observe them in the way that I might want to during a normal visit. I've also heard a lot of concerns with pharmacists and physicians as well about losing that important rapport with their patient. So it's really, we all love our patients. We want to see them and interact with them, build that relationship so that we know when they have a problem, they're going to come talk to us and they're going to come tell us what's going on. And I've heard from several providers concerns about, do you lose some of that over the telehealth visit? Technology has also been a huge issue that we found, with some patients more than others. But to successfully do the telehealth visit, the patient has to have first, Wi-Fi or internet access or phone access, which you would maybe think in the United States was not a problem. But I've had a few patients that I used to do home visits with prior to the pandemic, and I had two who did not have a phone or internet of any sort. And one, it was an income issue, but the other, she just didn't want a phone or the internet, so she didn't have them, which was fine. I went to her house. It worked out fine. But for patients, this certainly is an issue. And also, I would add into that maybe stability of housing, because if the patient, is located in one spot but is moving around because of financial challenges, if they don't have regular access to a phone or the internet, that can be a big problem. And then billing. I am not a billing expert. I try to stay away from the billing as much as possible, but this was certainly a big challenge pre-pandemic, where we've had since the pandemic the CARES Act, which has made this more reasonable for pharmacists to be able to bill for these services. So a method of telehealth that we found has been really effective is using this to reach out to our patients in rural and underserved communities. I'm from one. I'm from a town that does not have a stoplight. Lots of people who farm. I have some pictures in here for you. But it's a great way for patients in those areas to contact providers who are often several hours away. Let's see. Big increase in access to patient care. I guess that's another thing I would really highlight with this, is that we've seen, patients be able to reach not just a primary care provider, but often higher level providers as well. My son sees a cardiologist, and it's been really nice since the pandemic. We've been having those visits virtually, and it's been wonderful not to have to pull him out of school and take him in for those things. So then the pandemic begins, right? Telehealth was done some prior to the pandemic, but with the onset of that, patients in many areas were encouraged to postpone or cancel wellness visits, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. We did see this get better over time, but early on, when COVID was still so new to all of us, many patients were told, please don't come in because we don't want to risk you catching COVID while you're in for your office visit. So telehealth was implemented in many locations, and some that I work with directly are within the federal system, and some other, private healthcare providers, but it's a wonderful way for us to stay in touch with our patients. So I thought it might be interesting to do some research on telehealth and see what we can learn from what's gone on during the pandemic. Now that we are, perhaps seeing the tail end of that and getting out of that, are we going to see, we've seen this great increase in telehealth visits. What's it going to look like in the future? Are we going to go back to more face-to-face? Do we want to keep some telehealth? What does that look like? So my team and I conducted semi-structured qualitative key informant interviews with several pharmacists who routinely do telehealth visits. And these are all pharmacists who did telehealth prior to the pandemic, but ramped it up substantially during the pandemic. And this is mostly in an ambulatory care setting. So we developed a 16-question interview script that was really just designed to find out from them, how is it going with telehealth? Do they like it? Do their patients like it? And I think most importantly, do they feel like telehealth compromises the quality of patient care? Because that was a big concern that I heard about early on. Is a telehealth visit for a patient as good as an in-person visit? So I wanted to share with you my lessons learned kind of from the results. And one of our big takeaways was that there are patients who are really ideal for telehealth, and then there are patients who are really not ideal. And so this needs to be a very patient-centered decision more than a pharmacist or provider-centered decision. So first, the ideal patient, who is this person? Well, ideally, they would have the resources, skills, and ability to use technology. We know that that's not all of our patients, right? We have quite a few that don't use, smartphones. They don't want to use the internet, or they have access to that sometimes, but it's not, reliable. So identifying patients who routinely use those things is ideal. For many patients who are, for example, working parents, and they're busy and they're thrilled that they could do a visit via telehealth as opposed to having to take time off more out of their day and, drive in for a visit, particularly if they're not near the clinic. Pharmacists in the study also noted that the patients were not always great at taking the telehealth visit as seriously as they would a routine appointment that they would do in person. So with the telehealth visit, some of the pharmacists reported, the patient called me from a bus, and they're on the bus, and it's loud, and they can't hear, but they don't really take the visit as seriously because they thought, oh, it's just over the phone, so it's not the same thing. So it's important to make sure the patient knows this is going to be a visit. I need you to be somewhere quiet and private that we can have a really engaged conversation. Reliability is certainly an important factor as well. Back with patients not taking this as seriously, the cancellation rate for appointments, the last-minute cancellation rate or no-show rate was quite a lot higher with the telehealth visits than in-person visits, and we hypothesize that's because the patients didn't see it, quite as a real appointment at first. Additionally, there's medical conditions where this is a really good fit and others where perhaps it is not. So if I have to do, blood work, draw any labs, I'm not going to have the opportunity to do that as easily with telehealth. And so that would be potentially an issue. But we found that hypertension and diabetes are actually two that it seems to go very well if the patient is reasonably well controlled. So if they have diabetes, but they have their medication, their insulin's reasonably stable, their medications are stable, and they have a blood glucose meter, and you know that they know how to use it, you trust them to reliably take it, and then they can actually just upload the data off of the meter into the, patient portal, that works really well. But obviously that would not be a good fit if the patient is someone who doesn't reliably use their blood glucose meter, or maybe they tell you they use it, but then when they bring it in, it's still in the original packaging. I've had that happen before. So you have to really have that trust and rapport already with that patient. And this was never something that was recommended for an initial visit. But with diabetes, and like I was saying with hypertension, if you know the patient has a blood pressure cuff and they can use it and you trust them, it's really a great fit. Especially if these are typically short appointments anyway. If the patient has to drive several hours round trip to get in for a 15-minute discussion about their blood pressure, they're probably less inclined to do that if they could just do it, over video or the phone. They'd prefer that. I thought it was really interesting. Some of the pharmacists that I spoke with preferred the phone, and some preferred video. And the ones who preferred video, kind of rationalized it, saying, I love being able to see the patient ideally in their home, see what it looks like in the background, and see what their life is kind of like, and the eye contact, and being able to, again, build that rapport. Where I had others who said that really over the phone was pretty sufficient, and they loved that they didn't have to deal with technology issues nearly as much for phone visits. So I thought that was interesting information. And then the majority of pharmacists said that they did not feel telehealth visits compromised the quality of care they were giving their patients, which to me was the huge, most important factor over, or preference. It's definitely the quality of care. Some did. Some of the pharmacists said, I don't think it's as good as an in-person visit, and I'm going to be going back to in-person visits as soon as I can. So we got a mix on that. What are some more things that would be ideal if you're considering offering telehealth visits? The pharmacists that I talked with recommended having strong IT support. And in some cases, this was like an app, so they'd be installing the GoToMeeting or the Zoom app or some method like that. They would actually have the patient, when they were doing their initial visit in the clinic, they would have an IT person there to put the app on the patient's phone or device, so then the patient, and teach them how to use it while they were physically in the same space, so that, in 2 weeks when they're calling in for their telehealth visit, they already knew how to use it. I thought that was brilliant. And also, they mentioned a lot wanting to make sure that there was IT support for the pharmacist during the visit as well. I know I was not very good at Zoom when I first started using it to teach, and we've all learned a lot, but I think that's still going to be important as well. Teaching the patient how to use the technology, they said, was very key, wanting to make sure that the patient did not go home thinking they knew how to do it and really have a lot of issues on the day of. Make sure that the patient has the appropriate device and the connectivity for that, they highlighted as key. And then also making sure that the patient understands this is a real visit. This is not a, sort of visit. It doesn't really count. It's a real visit, just like if we were physically in the same space, wanting them to really take it very seriously. So just as a quick summary, these were certainly some of the takeaways and lessons learned from offering more telehealth visits during the pandemic. So it's become pretty commonplace. I don't know how many of you offer these, but in the United States it's become quite common, particularly in communities where they serve a large rural population. The pharmacists that I interviewed felt like they really did like being able to offer telehealth and that it kept them connected with their patients during the pandemic when they really were concerned about kind of losing touch with people or patients deciding it wasn't worth it, risking their health to come into a clinic. Pharmacists expressed a lot of concerns about the barriers, the biggest two being technology and then the patients being distracted or not taking it seriously. I had several, that mentioned the patient would call in for their telehealth visit and the TV would be really loud in the background, or it sounded like they were having a party in the background. So back to making sure that we train our patients to know that this is a real visit. They expressed a lot of value in the IT or information technology support that and many noted they actually their company had hired quite a lot more IT support since they were offering telehealth visits. They also emphasized the importance of setting expectations, so making sure the patient understands, while you're still in person, ideally at that initial visit, what is the telehealth one going to look like? But in general, the majority of pharmacists believe that the quality of care was not compromised if this was the right patient. So if the patient was somebody who, like I said, was well controlled, they were reliable, they were comfortable and interested in using the technology. So kind of to summarize all of that, really the decision needs to be collaborative between the provider and the patient and very personalized. So making sure it's the right person. This is not a one-size-fits-all sort of offering. These are some references that I used, and I will say this is a manuscript that's currently under review. I was hoping maybe it would be accepted by this, so I, could put a citation in there for it, but there may be more to come. Anyway, here's my email address, so if you'd like to talk more about this or have questions, I'd love to talk about that. And then I want to acknowledge two of my colleagues who were instrumental in this research as well, Dr. Fraser and then Olivia Hiskey, who is going to graduate here shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Just to sum up this presentation, we have here a perspective both from practice and research on telehealth. This idea actually is not, there's no one size that fits all. It's an interesting point that I actually, kept hearing the notes that on one hand you lose the rapport with your patient because you're not live with them, but on the other hand with telehealth we have extra information because you actually see the household. So I think probably you can see this as a complementary service that pharmacists can provide. And this idea that patients, some of them are adapted or not adapted or in the process of getting adapted. So thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your experience. So with no further ado, I'll invite now our distinguished speakers to move to the chairs, and it's my pleasure to invite you to the stage our Q&A facilitator, Julie Ackers. She's an Associate Dean of External Relations and Associate Professor at the Washington State University College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Science in Spokane, Washington. So the floor is yours, Julie. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Luis, and great presentations, both Wanda and Kim, and I'm excited to start this Q&A session. I know that many of you in the audience likely have several questions. I want to start out with a question to each of you. My first is for Wanda. It sounds like your university had a very robust emergency preparedness plan in place prior to Hurricane Maria. It was tested drastically, unfortunately, and your island is just going through another hurricane as we speak and recovery process. How you shared some lessons learned of things that you reviewed and modified after. What type of continuing quality improvement process do you have in place, and as you're going through now and testing the modifications even that you made, what's kind of the next step post Hurricane Fiona?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Certainly, the players change. So you may have now members of the academic administrative team now that were not there before. So the historic memory is very important when you start to summarize what is the plan, how are we going to do this, how we did it the last time, what worked, what didn't work, and reminding everybody. So that having that historical memory of, this is the process. In that sense, our deanship of administration is a key factor because they deal with the security, with the infrastructure of the buildings, etc., the air conditioners. But having those key pieces and those people always there to provide that continuity, that's very important. We have made changes. The backup generators are much better now, the water towers, extraction, etc. But we know we cannot stay still. We have to continue to adapt to how we make things. Technology changes. So we don't know if the technology that we'll have in 5 years from now will be more susceptible than the one we have now. Like Luis said, we went back to the landlines at home, right? And who would have thought that we would go back to landlines? But now we have cell phones and WhatsApp and whatnot. We don't know what's going to be next. I guess the point is that when you have new technology coming in, new ways of working and living, you have to question yourself all the time in the back of my mind, will this work when an event like this happens?
All right, that's a great process. Kim, my question for you, as you shared the research that you've done with pharmacists and other providers who are providing telehealth, as an educator and knowing that you oversee a practice lab, how did that or did it impact how you educate student pharmacists for the future?
Thank you. So we had a great opportunity to do that during the pandemic. Actually, we were very much forced into being virtual for education. But we actually took one of our patient care simulations, and it was, historically had always been a hands-on simulation with a mannequin where the students would come in and ask the mannequin questions, and it would be, voice would be there. But during the pandemic, before we even realized telehealth was becoming such a big thing, we decided to turn it into a telehealth simulation. And it actually went really well. We had the patient was having upper respiratory infection symptoms, and so the students had to ask questions to be able to kind of discern, was this COVID, was this influenza, was it neither of those things? Is the patient severe enough that they need to go to the ER, or is this something that it would be reasonable to, prescribe something for it, or have them just stay home? And so it actually went really well, and is one of the things that has stuck. Even though we're now back in person, we still have the students do this telehealth simulation because we liked it so much, and we really think this is where practice is headed. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Wanda, do you find that there was modifications within your curriculum as well, kind of post-COVID and even post-hurricane, that modifications that you made that you've decided to keep, or has everything kind of returned to pre-COVID?
I guess the curriculum in itself has not changed. It has changed the way we look at the academic year. Every year, as we are about to start, we put disclaimers in the syllabi saying this is a proposed itinerary of activities unless we have unforeseen atmospheric events or something, or some other things. So the students know that there needs to be a flexibility in the curriculum. Granted that we will have to make sure that we comply with what we are expected to comply with, but that there has to be flexibility on their part, on our part, on everybody's part when these things happen. In terms of the content, I don't think we have changed much for the hurricane preparedness. For COVID, yes, certainly, as we have established now an interprofessional COVID vaccination center at the campus. So that activity involves our students as well as students from the nursing school, medical school, and faculty from those areas. So the COVID part has changed some of the content in terms of the activities they do, specifically in interprofessional education. the hurricane has not affected the content in itself, but the way we look at it in terms of, the flexibility that needs to be built in when we do the programming for the semester and for the year, to have a couple of days of buffer built in there, just in case.
Great. And Luis, I can turn it to the audience, I believe. We are excited to take any questions that you have, and we have FIP staff as well who are ready to run around with microphones. So please raise your hand, stand if you have any questions for either right here.
Okay, thank you so much. Buenos dias. My first question, my name, by the way, is Haleon. I'm from Roosevelt University College of Pharmacy in Chicago, in Illinois, United States. Wanda, my first question to you, hopefully you're doing well. I visited the beautiful island, Puerto Rico. I've noticed before and after there is resiliency. So did you think that transferred to the student as well?
Yes. That's a great question. Yes, I think so. I think you have to convey that to the students, and they have to learn that. And I was asked that question just last week for another program. And resilience, I think, having dealt with the Hurricane Maria in 2017, made us more ready to respond to COVID. Because we have already learned how to deal with a major crisis. So when all of a sudden we had to go into a lockdown and go with the courses online and do these things suddenly and respond swiftly, I think the mindset from Maria helped us in dealing with that unforeseen, unexpected event. Resiliency is something that obviously it depends on what your life conditions are. And what happens in your life, what types of events you have to endure, over and over again. I think that students, especially first generation college students, are very resilient. I think all of them are resilient, but you have to think about their life circumstances that may make them more resilient, some more than others, and identify what makes them more resilient. But yes, we talk about it. We talk about it. We have to be very purposeful about resilience, so they know that our students can get into crisis modes anytime, with hurricane or no hurricane, right? Or COVID or no COVID, and we have to assure them that we will have crisis. We all do in our professional life, at work, at home. But how do you deal with that? And I was just talking to a group of students last week. Pharmacists deal with the unexpected every day. I think we work on a crisis mode, pharmacists. We see a patient, and we don't know what to expect, what change, unexpected changes in their health conditions, unexpected changes in their drug therapy responses, in their personal life, in their health insurance status. So I think we, as a profession, we deal with unexpected changes all the time with our patients, and we don't realize that we do that, and we have to respond, to the benefit of the patient.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, they have a great role model in the College of Pharmacy. My next question is to Kim. Kim, I appreciate your presentation on telehealth and barriers and challenges. Do you think there's enough research to show there is no difference in the outcome, say, like for medication therapy management?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no, I don't think there's enough research, especially with ambulatory care pharmacy, this still being a reasonably new service. I think, the study that I did was really just qualitative in nature and was not designed to show health outcomes. That's definitely needed to know. We can hypothesize, does it change the quality of care? Hopefully not. And many pharmacists don't think so, but we'll see, right? We have to wait and see the outcomes data. So thank you. Thank you for the question.
Hi, good morning. Magali Rodriguez de Bidner, University of Maryland in the US. As I hear to both of you present how you had to adapt based on different conditions, and we know if it's the pandemic or natural disasters, we have had to immediately adapt. My question to you is related to curriculum. Many of our schools and our curriculum tend to be so rigid. And so this is the way it's done. We deal with standards from accreditation agencies. What lessons have we taken from there to really modify our curriculum and make our curriculum more adaptive to the changes that are happening around the world and the global changes?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. Thank you, Magali. Certainly, we have learned from the pandemic, especially on the experiential learning side, that those activities can be done in a somewhat different way, and that there's some flexibility that needs to be built in whatever we do in our curriculum. So that's an example. I think that adapting is key, and doing it quickly. And sometimes we have to explain to the students. The students are the hardest ones to explain to, that we can do things in a different way, but not necessarily the way they want it, right? Sometimes they want it different, but the way they want it, and sometimes we need to do it differently, but in a way we comply with our regulations, with our accreditation, etc. So I agree with you that we have to adapt and be flexible in our curricular programs, especially because anything like this phenomenon can happen at any point. Now we're 2 years down the road with COVID. We're not done, and we don't know if next year we'll be dealing in a different way with COVID, and we have to adapt again to something completely different. So I agree that, yes, and sometimes we as faculty tend to be inflexible. Many times, we have to make sure that we're open to that flexibility, but communicating clearly to our stakeholders why we're introducing that flexibility and why that is a good flexibility for them as learners. And that's a key part of the communication too.
I agree with Wanda, and I think there were many things that we didn't change what we taught, but we changed how we taught it. So for example, I teach a skills lab, and I teach the students how to use inhalers and how to counsel a patient on how to use an inhaler. So we actually put together at the beginning of the semester, before it started, boxes of demo inhalers and demo eye drops and things, and mailed it to them. So then even though we were in the same place, and we're on Zoom, on video, but they have an inhaler and I have an inhaler, and we can go through the process, even though it's not what I would want. I'd much rather be in person, but it worked okay. But then there were also skills where we really just did not have that flexibility. I was telling Wanda earlier, I teach the class where the students learn to give immunizations, and that was not going to happen through virtual care. I really wanted to be in the same room with them if they were going to be giving shots to people. So I think there's some skills that it fit pretty well to, others that maybe not so much. But I think that was important. And then the other piece that I would add was that we also gave a lot of thought to what are these new cutting-edge pharmacy practice skills, and making sure that we incorporated those. So we were actually doing a bit of, we were teaching our students about point-of-care testing prior to COVID, so they knew how to do the nasal swab and the throat swab, and so we just kind of modified that slightly for COVID, but I felt really good that we were already doing some of these things that were applicable. So I think it's on all of us as faculty at colleges to make sure that we're thinking not just what are skills they need today, but what are the upcoming skills they may need in a few years, and how can we incorporate that into our curricula.
And that's a very important point, because it may seem that the curricula are the same, that we're not changing, but we are, because we are introducing innovative ways of doing things. So even though the structure may seem the same, or the content, we know that every time we offer a course, something new has to be in there. Something. Otherwise, we're not really keeping up to date with the profession, with the discipline, etc.
Thank you. My name is Haleon. I'm from Indonesia. I'm a vice president of the Indonesian Pharmacists Association. Firstly, I would like to comment to what Wanda says, that before, the satellite communication is very important. It happened when we had biggest tsunami, I guess, back in 2004. It was totally lost communication for about 3 days. And then the satellite communication is very important for us. I do. I would like to share a little bit about in Indonesia. We have established what's so-called ATB. It's a Pharmacist Disaster Response Team that we established nationally and also regionally. This is really important. It happened when in 2018 we have another tsunami in Celebes Island. We really respond immediately when we got the disaster. Then we sent from all over provinces in Indonesia to help them, dropping some medicines as well as foods and so on. The other thing I would like to address my question to Kim regarding the telehealth. Are they using probes to check the body temperature and other things? And how about if the patients need followed up by physicians?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. So to address the first part, kind of doing those physical exam pieces, you have to be reliant on the patient to, one, be capable of doing these things on themselves, and two, that the technology that they're using is accurate, because we know even, thermometers, right, are not always accurate. So that's something that we've had to be really thoughtful and strategic about. If we're expecting them to use a blood pressure cuff or, a thermometer in that case, but anything, a blood glucose meter, we want to make sure that it's one we are already familiar with, and that is one that we are kind of providing to them for that use, because then we can, know that we can trust that it works well. So that was a big piece of it. And I think there's definitely patients that, even trusting them to take their temperature is not necessarily something you would feel really comfortable with. They're maybe just not, particularly skilled. And maybe if they have a caregiver, I've seen some cases where the patient was not particularly capable, but they had a caregiver who was there, who I did trust, to be doing these things correctly. So I think it comes back to who's the right patient. It's a great fit for some, and it's not a good fit for others. And so kind of figuring that part out is going to be really important. Yeah. Thank you.
While we look for any other audience questions, thank you for your comment and question, and it made me think of the supply chain issues and where you were mentioning that during the tsunami there was medications and other supplies being dropped in. Wanda, I know that's something that when you're on an island, it can be difficult to get supplies. I think that was addressed a little bit. Is there more that you can expand on how you guys have partnered to make sure that you have enough supplies for emergencies?
Yes, it comes this time of the year, and people go crazy at Costco, right? Buying. No, certainly. There's a piece I did not mention. In Puerto Rico, we have a significant drug manufacturing enterprise, and it was it was a challenge for them because they had to stop their plants for some time, and to go again, start building, the manufacture was a challenge because of the power issue. Although they have their own generators, their employees, what were they going through? What could happen? But those drugs are not usually our source of drugs. We rely on everything, just about everything being shipped to us. So that's why the lines in the supermarkets and just about everywhere, in the gas station, everywhere, were so long because the supplies were coming in a more slower way. So everything, everything gets very, very difficult when you're trying to get supplies in and distributed when things are not working, power or roads or access. So that was a challenge. That was a real challenge. Supplies, medications, food.
And I believe that the pharmaceutical manufacturing impacts in Puerto Rico was global because many pharmacies, health systems everywhere around the world relied on those manufacturers. So that's just kind of, as we say, one FIP, where we truly are, one global community that if there's a natural disaster, a hurricane that impacts Puerto Rico, and you look at the globe and think that's just one small portion of our world, what impact that can have to every nation and every community across the globe. It just shows even more so that we need to all be involved in making sure that there's emergency preparedness plans for our supply chain worldwide.
Amgen has one of the main biggest operations of biologics in Puerto Rico. And going back to COVID, when the government declared that there was going to be a lockdown for absolutely everybody, even the manufacturing plants, they really had to make their case that they couldn't turn off their bioreactors for the biologics. And that was, there was this back and forth with the government because in our lockdown, which was very early, March 16 of 2020, everybody was expected to be home, period. And they had to make a case that they could not shut down the bioreactors for the biologics. And, they could, modify the way they did it or how much they did it, but, issues like that also have to be taken into account. When you talk about COVID, for us, a very important phenomenon was that the government established a task force to deal with, recommendations, a task force to provide recommendations to the government in terms of what should be open, what should be closed, use of masks, use of PPE, whatever, curfew. We even had a curfew for some time. And then you have to think, okay, so these recommendations are going on, and what is the end of it? Because then the economic side turned into against the medical side. Because the restaurants wanted to be open, the movie theaters, and so these two sectors started to collide because they both were providing recommendations to the government. And we healthcare professionals and scientists wanted to keep a tight control, right? And the economic sector, with a reason, they wanted to open things up. So achieving that balance was very difficult for us on when to open what sector of the economy and keeping a sense of safety for the public in general. So that was a very, very dicey scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So it's time to actually finish our session. I would like to thank our speakers and our facilitator for all your help and for sharing your expertise. Just as a wrap-up, we actually had a perspective from the academic point of view, but also from the practice point of view. We went back to landlines and to generators, and you actually talk about telehealth and satellite phones. I'll not forget that one, the satellite phones. So we are in back and forth, and although it's difficult to predict the unexpected, we definitely can expect that something unexpected will happen. And I'm very much looking forward to hear your stories or what I actually have been able to cope with COVID, because the pandemic is still going on. In the meantime, I'll just, FIP will keep on trying to gather as many experiences and examples as possible. And until then, in our next conference, I hope you enjoy the rest of our conference. And if you have any questions to our speakers, just feel free to approach them. Thank you so much. Looking forward to see you later.
Hello, hello. Oh. Huh. So good, is it afternoon yet? Nobody knows. Good afternoon, everybody. If you have any trouble seeing our wonderful panelists, please feel free to come to the front of the room. I feel very much when I do these sessions, it's like the university. The students are always in the back, and we have to encourage them to come to the front. I see you found some friends. If you don't have any friends sitting next to you, please introduce yourselves to each other, find some new friends. This is a wonderful space for us to mix and mingle. I'm Vibhuti Arya. I am the chair for this session. I'm a professor at St. John's University in New York, and I work with the New York City Health Department, which is like their health ministry, on policy and programming. I'm very honored to be chairing this amazing session. We've got quite a few experts here, and in the interest of time, I'm going to let you know some logistics and things that we can move on with, but it's going to be really important that we ask you to please, if you have any questions or if you would like to hear any specific things that you want them to elaborate on, we do have time for a question and answer session right after. So I do know that we are joined by a live audience as well, so we'd like to welcome you. As you have noticed that from FIP, thank you so kindly, we've got lots of different things that we're tackling with here, particularly in the light of the pandemic. It's really, really great to see people in person. It's nice to meet people for the first time that I've been seeing on Zoom calls and I think some other platforms that we've been using. But we're really focusing on the themes of what we have learned from the pandemic. How do we actually use the lessons that we have learned moving forward and integrating them into our work, particularly when we're dealing with health inequities and underserved communities that have been marginalized, and we want to bring that equity into all of our planning as well as our execution of plans. So just some logistics to go through. There's no conflicts of interest to report here by either myself or the speakers. Please make sure that you evaluate this session via the FIP Congress app. If you have not downloaded the app so far, please do so while you're sitting here. This is just like students who download things last minute. Your evaluation is going to help us improve the quality, and we would love to hear your questions and any things that you want us to consider for future programming as well. So, as I said, you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A part of the program. You can use some of the notes that we have, as well as some of the yes or no page that we have in the fancy booklet that we've provided to you when the questions are invited at the end. We do kindly ask that there are no recordings of this session. They will be made available later, and we request that you please do not download any slides at the end of the session. There will be a PDF provided based on our approval from our speakers to make sure that we email these to you when you actually have registered for the conference. We will be using some hashtags, so please feel free if there's anything that resonates with you, if there's a point that you'd like to share with the world through Twitter, please use the hashtags that we have, FIP Congress or FIP 2022. And we ask that you please silence your phones. If you do happen to take a call, please let them know you're at the best session and cannot talk right now. Next year, we'll be happy to welcome you. Our colleagues in Australia are planning a wonderful Congress next year. I have not been promised that koala bears will be in attendance, but I'm getting a thumbs up that that perhaps could be true. So make your wildest dreams come true in Australia next year. All right, so make sure, as we are being responsible, to please take all of the stuff you brought in out. If you notice anything you've left behind, we do our best to ensure that nobody else takes it for you. But please make sure that you take all your belongings. First of all, we would also like to acknowledge that this symposium is sponsored through unconditional funding by Haleon, so we would appreciate that. And we're going to begin with our program. I'm going to do some brief introductions today. So at first, I'm going to introduce Sarah McDonald and Tess Player. Sarah is the VP of Sustainability at Haleon, and Tess is the global head of health professional and health influencer marketing at Haleon. Sarah pretty much has worked on some really cool projects about sustainability strategies, and especially when she was at Unilever as well. She developed the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, so you'll hear a lot of sustainability today in our work. Tess is the global head, as I mentioned, of health professional and health influencer marketing at Haleon, and she's also worked on a lot of sustainability-focused work based on deep human insight and delivering strong and sustained business growth. She's also noted that her special area of interest is enabling better self-care, which we're really excited to hear from them. So I'm going to ask Sarah and Tess to go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand this slide deck to you.
Great, so I'd just like to echo that very warm welcome, not only to the people in the room, but of course those that are joining us virtually. And just to say that we are delighted to be here today to discuss health inclusivity and the role of pharmacy. So Haleon was launched in July this year, and it exists to deliver better everyday health with humanity. And it is an organisation that is focused on improving the everyday health of billions of people worldwide, not just with our trusted brands, products and services, but to help people feel healthier and happier. However, for too many people, that is beyond their reach. So as a consumer healthcare company, we have a unique opportunity to break down the social barriers that hold people back from everyday health. So why are we here? It's because pharmacists matter. They have their unique local and community knowledge, and they see the gaps to inclusive everyday health every day. And when a pharmacy team is fully integrated in the healthcare systems, they can ensure that those health interventions are tailored and therefore more impactful for their community. Pharmacists are also in a unique position that their patient-centered care can truly empower their patients to achieve better self-care. So for us as Haleon, we stand before you today honouring the commitment that we made to partner with pharmacy to develop, co-design and co-develop activities that are for the pharmacy, developed with the pharmacy team, as well as lend our support through the network of partnerships that we have to continue to support the advocacy of pharmacy policies and regulation changes. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Sarah to talk us through the vision for Health Inclusivity Index.
Thanks, Tess. So as Tess just said, Haleon's purpose is to deliver better everyday health with humanity. And our sustainability strategy focuses on tackling the social and the environmental barriers that stand in the way of us achieving that purpose. And what we're focused on is making everyday health more achievable, more inclusive, and more sustainable for millions of people around the world. With that in mind, we announced an ambitious goal to empower millions of people a year to be more included in opportunities for better everyday health, empowering 50 million people every year by 2025. Now, in helping more people be better included in health inclusivity, there are a number of barriers that stand in the way, and we feel the ones where we can play a big role as Haleon is these three barriers. So the first one is health literacy. So lots of people lack the health knowledge, the confidence, and the being equipped to look after their everyday health. They might not know the right behaviours to practice or might not feel that they've got the competency to practice those behaviours. We also know that people need the social support around them to look after their health. That can be from their immediate family, from carers, and also from the community that they live in. And they sometimes feel unconfident or reticent to seek the healthcare advice that they need. So there's a lot we can do in the area of health literacy to help more people feel more confident, more equipped and more supported to look after their everyday health. The second barrier we want to focus on is healthcare accessibility. So inclusive and appropriate healthcare services are not necessarily always accessible to everyone, and some people might struggle to access services that work for them. We also know that healthcare professionals are incredibly stretched, juggling lots and lots of different priorities, and they may not have the time or the resources that they need to help support people in looking after their everyday health. So that's the second barrier that we want to act on. And then the third one is bias and prejudice. We want to play a role as Haleon in helping create an enabling environment where everyone has the opportunity to be and feel included in opportunities for everyday health. But we know that today that's not necessarily the case for some people. There are issues of limiting cultural norms, stereotypes, conscious and unconscious bias that mean some people don't feel as included as others in being able to have the opportunities they want for their everyday health. And there's also a challenge around underrepresentation, where not all communities are yet as well represented amongst healthcare professionals as they could be. So that's the third barrier that we're focusing on. I just wanted to bring to life those three barriers with some statistics. So on the first one, health literacy, the impact of low health literacy really holds billions of people back from better everyday health. So in China, some 77% of the population have low health literacy. It's 42% in the UK, and in the US, 1 in 4 parents have low health literacy, and that really impacts their ability to use health knowledge and information to properly look after their children's health. So it's really a big issue where together we can make a difference. And I just wanted to give some examples of what we're already doing as Haleon to help tackle this issue of health literacy. So the first example I wanted to talk about is in our respiratory health category and our Actions to Breathe Cleaner programme. So through this programme, we're partnering with schools, and for example, doing that in the UK through the National Schools Partnership, to educate and engage primary school kids around air pollution, how it affects their health, and what are some simple actions they can take every day to mitigate the effect of air pollution on their health. And we're seeing some really brilliant results in terms of school kids feeling more knowledgeable about air pollution and also equipped to take those actions that's helping reduce their exposure to that problem. The second example is in wellness and nutrition, and it's called NutriLab. And here is an example from China, and what we're doing is engaging people through the very popular and well-used platform WeChat to understand more about their nutrition profile and actions they can take to help improve that. And the third example is in pain relief with caregivers. So caregivers really tirelessly give of their time to look after other people's health, and they're such an important part of supporting everyday health. But often that comes at a cost to them, where they don't necessarily have the time they need to connect properly with their loved ones, and also aren't looking after their own health as well as they might. So that's an issue that we're tackling through that programme. So on to the second barrier of healthcare accessibility. As I was saying earlier, too many individuals are held back or excluded from accessing healthcare because they are not able to find the appropriate and inclusive services that work for them. So just some examples of things we're doing to help address that problem. So the first one is using our deep understanding of osteoarthritis sufferers and some of the challenges that they face in using products and accessing information online. And there what we've done is partner with the Arthritis Foundation to create a product with an adapted cap that's really easy for people that experience hand pain and dexterity issues because of arthritis to use. The second example is in the UK, and it's partnering with the Dental Wellness Trust to help children from deprived areas to access dental checkups. And we're doing that through a mobile dental hub that is brought out to them in the community in Tesco supermarket car parks. And then the third one is a long-standing partnership we've been involved in for a long time, partnering with Smile Train to help children affected by cleft lip or palate to access the surgery they need to correct that issue, and also doing work to tackle some of the stigma that exists around that condition that children and their families can experience. And then just moving on to the last barrier of bias and prejudice. Again, this has a really significant negative effect on people's mental and also physical health. And again, some statistics to bring it to life. So 77% of citizens in the US experience some form of discrimination every day, and that can be driven by their race, their age, their weight, or their sex, and it can really affect their health outcomes. Moving to the UK, 42% of black people believe their health is not as protected as white people's. And then going back to the US, black women in the US have a 1 in 4 higher mortality rate from cancer than white women, and yet they only represent 5% of the population involved in clinical trials. And finally, ageism is a problem that kind of pervades everywhere around the world, and it comes at a cost. So this is an example from the US, where ageism is leading to excess health costs of $63 billion a year across 8 different major health conditions. And just an example of what we're doing here, and it's linked again to our respiratory health category, and very topical given we're coming out of the COVID pandemic, where not everyone has the same opportunity to rest and recover and take time off from work when they fall sick, perhaps because they don't have the safety net of paid sick pay from their employer, but also because cultural pressure exists to kind of power through and go to work while sick, which we all know is not a very good idea when we have issues like COVID or flu pandemics around. So what we're doing here is partnering with an NGO partner called the Good Plus Foundation to offer microgrants that helps people who might not otherwise be able to afford a day off to stay home and rest and recover when they fall sick to do so. And then we're also working with influencers and with an Emmy Award-winning poet and activist to help combat that social stigma that means people feel pressured to go to work sick even if they have the possibility not to. So just wanted to say a bit about what we're doing to tackle those 3 barriers around health inclusivity, health literacy, healthcare accessibility, and bias and prejudice, and also introduce a partnership that we are involved in around the Health Inclusivity Index. And I'll hand on now to my colleagues on the panel, Charlotte and Emmy, to talk more about that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can you hear me? There we go. Thank you so much, Sarah and Tess. Some key points that we heard that I hope resonated with you if you want to tweet these. We certainly heard a lot about partnerships and making sure that those partnerships are not just one-time things, but they're actually sustained in their efforts for longitudinal work. We also heard a little bit about policy, because we know that we can have interventions, but unless you actually have policy level and systems level intervention, which our speakers will talk about next, there's really a need for that in the sustainability space. And we also heard a little bit about social and environmental barriers. So what we're gonna do now is move that intelligence into some systems level and public health sort of lens, if I will, from understanding what health inclusivity is and how it actually differs from health equity, which is a topic that has come up quite often, and really learning about the nuances from our next 2 speakers. So I'd like to introduce Charlotte Erzbol, who's a founding partner of Hansen and Erzbol Agenda, where she does some strategic consultancy in sustainable transformation. She's also worked as a senior advisor to the UN Global Compact and is on the steering committee of the Economist Impact Health Inclusivity Index that we will hear about in just a few minutes. Emmy Michael is also here with us today, and she's a manager in the Health Policy and Insights team at Economist Impact. She has a special interest in health inequalities and social determinants of health, also something that's been on the top of our conversation at the main stage recently globally. Emmy's also a global health research strategist, and her expertise in global health advisory, program design, and healthcare communications really makes her a woman after my own heart. So we're really excited to hear from them and looking forward to seeing how you're going to distinguish between health inclusivity and health equity.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the lovely introduction. My name is Emmy Michael, and I have the pleasure of representing the Economist Impact team, which, with the support from Haleon, have developed the Health Inclusivity Index. The Health Inclusivity Index aims to assess the state of health inclusivity in 40 countries. And today we'll be presenting some key findings that are relevant to the pharmaceutical industry and the relevance of pharmacists in driving health inclusivity. We'll run you through a bit of a background on the Health Inclusivity Index, what it is, why it was developed, and some key findings that are really relevant for the topic today. So I'll be back shortly to run you through some of the findings, but I'll hand over to Charlotte, who will briefly introduce the index and the context around it. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Emmy, and thank you for having me here. It's really very exciting to, for the first time, being able to talk about the Health Inclusivity Index for a slightly larger group. So what we thought we would do was just to dive a little bit into what is health inclusivity. How do we define it? Because in many ways, this is a new way of looking at health and everyday health and what create barriers for us to be able to achieve it and what makes us vulnerable and resilient. So first of all, a few introductory remarks about the index. It's the first time that we have really dived into health inclusivity, trying to bring out data in 3 different dimensions to look at countries, what makes them able to drive health inclusivity among their populations, and what are the defining factors for that, both at the policy level, at the systems level, and at the individual level as well. 40 countries are part of the index to begin with, so it's also important, as Emmy is talking about some of the findings, not to jump to the conclusion just because one country is right now the best in the index, it's also the world's best country in terms of achieving health inclusivity. But what we're hoping that this will be able to do is that for countries to use this as a baseline for improving their health inclusivity, and through this collective data gathering, also to embark on a collective learning process to see how we can improve. And I think one of the most important insights for me is that health inclusivity doesn't necessarily always connect with a country's ability to invest in health. It's more a matter of a country's way of valuing health among all of its population. So I think let that stick in your mind. And of course also, we're hoping that this index will really spur action. And also to say that since this is a very new area, obviously there are lots of data that we can't access. So this is also to begin a conversation of what drives health inclusivity and what takes away. So let me just start with a few words of what is health inclusivity. And for us to be able to understand health inclusivity, we also have to understand what excludes people from health. And here it's important to also understand that when we are talking about what makes people vulnerable, for us it's really important to ensure that there is this common understanding that vulnerabilities is not the same as putting labels on people. In many ways, when we put a label on people, a diabetic, a handicapped person, a lonely person, we label them and we treat them differently. And what we often do when we do that is that we take away their empowerment, we disempower them, and we take away their agency. Having worked for many, many years in the field of diabetes, I knew how much that actually matters to people coming to their doctor with a diabetes diagnosis and often being treated as people who really didn't know how to take good care of themselves. And the way that they were treated by the healthcare professionals made them shy away from coming to the doctor or to the healthcare system to seek out health, because they felt it was embarrassing that they couldn't take better care of themselves. And that contributed to put them at a point where their agency and their ability to self-manage was actually taken away from them. So when we look at vulnerability, it's important to understand that in any given period of time during a life course, we can all be vulnerable. It's a complex of different factors and layers that can impact our vulnerability. And we saw that very much during COVID, where people that were already vulnerable in society, take for example migrant workers, not being able to perform their jobs, having to go back home, many single mothers who were not able to take time away from their family to get immunization and so on and so forth. Just a funny example that I wanted to share with you was, for example, in the United States, where an attempt was made in order to encourage more people to come and present to get vaccinations. And a reward was given of $100 or something for people to turn up for their vaccinations. And what that did was that for a number of particular single mothers, this freed them up to be able to have their children taken care of while they went to the doctors and get their vaccinations. So something that we might not necessarily think about, but all of these complex factors that we need to understand when we're meeting with them. And of course, this is where the pharmacists are coming in, playing such an important role, because often pharmacists are the front lines, meeting people before they go to, if you want, the formal healthcare system. And where it's important that we meet people where they are and understand their different circumstances and treat them where they are, in respect, not with the labels that we might put on them. And I think that's an exercise for all of us to consider in terms of, understanding people's life situations and helping them where they are. And of course, once we understand many of these different barriers, we can also deal with them in a better way. I was part of developing a major initiative called Cities Changing Diabetes, where we tried to understand what these factors were. And just a few examples of what were some of the major barriers for people to take better care of their own health and driving health agency. So for example, in a sprawling city such as Houston, where people would be commuting often up to 4 hours every day to get to and back to their jobs, they were not on the radar of the public health service organizations in the city. But actually, they were very vulnerable because they had sometimes 2 or 3 meals in their car and leading a very sedentary lifestyle. But no one had them on their radar. The same thing in Copenhagen, where we discovered that one of the biggest barriers for health agency was loneliness among men without a job. And they were invisible because they felt embarrassed about their situation. So the last thing they wanted to do was to go and present with any kind of diagnosis, because that fell down maybe to a 10th priority in their long list of other issues that they were trying to deal with. So this is about the social support and the different systems support and how we embrace and meet people in a daily setting. And just to say that, look at this image up here, like an inverted Maslow's pyramid of needs. When there are enough compounding factors that can bring us down to a point in this vulnerability vortex, we lose capabilities to take good care of our own health and maybe to taking good care of our loved ones' health as well. And that's where we need to be met in a different way than often the healthcare system can do. And also think about the fact that on average, we may present to the doctor's office or in the healthcare system 8 hours a year. So the remaining 800 and how many hours, we are left on our own. And so how do we ensure that we empower people where they are? So this is what the index is trying to look at, also from a policy perspective, and how we can activate the many different actors in society, in the community, to really drive agency and empowerment. So just a few words, and you probably know these visuals, and in many ways they're horrible because they are in some ways already sort of stigmatizing certain population groups, but they're the best that we have. But it's a little bit about why equity matters, but also why inclusivity matters. So here you see, 3 different sizes of young people trying to watch a baseball game. And if we ensure that everyone have equal access to that game by giving them different opportunities for getting higher up, that's equity. But in many ways, it doesn't necessarily always solve the problem. And if you look at this image, you can say that in reality, there are some people that are simply falling off the radar, as I was saying. They become invisible. We don't see them because they don't come and present. They've given up hope that they are either worth helping or that it really matters when they come and present. So in reality, what we want to do is trying to remove those barriers that are keeping people away from achieving their everyday health. And they are manifold. They can be environmental, they can be systemic, economic, individual, cultural, social, sometimes exacerbated by the labels and the stigma that we put on people and the way that we treat them in everyday life. And so being able to understand what those barriers are also enable us to do something about it. So this is what we're trying to do. So this is the definition that I want to leave you with before I hand over the word back to Emmy. That the way that we in this collaboration that has been helpful in building the index and identifying the indicators for how we define health inclusivity, this is the way we define it. So it's a process of removing the personal, social, cultural, and political barriers that prevent individuals and communities from experiencing good physical and mental health and a life fully realized. So thank you very much, and I would love to give back the words to Emmy to give you a little bit more insights about the actual index. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Really helpful background on why the Inclusivity Index was created. So today I'll be running you through a bit of an introduction and context on the index, particularly around its methodology and how it was created. And then I'll be going through how pharmacists are represented in the index and what therefore their role in supporting health inclusivity is deemed to be based on our findings. So, as Charlotte went through earlier, the index assesses a country's policies and processes across 3 domains. It aims to assess health inclusivity in 40 countries initially, with the view of expanding over the next few years. So 3 domains. Domain 1, health in society. This domain really looks at the strategies and policies that have been put in place to explore the social and cultural determinants of health. Not only to explore them, but to understand what factors a country is using to address the inequalities that stem from them. Domain 2, inclusive health systems, looks at the structure, the infrastructural system that's in place to ensure a country has adopted universal health coverage, but also how the efforts and mechanisms that are in place to expand access to as many people as possible. And finally, domain 3, people and community empowerment. And this really looks at the individual level, how a country has incorporated efforts to empower individuals and communities to be navigators and agents of their own health. This slide provides an overview of the index framework, so the indicators that have been incorporated into the index to assess health inclusivity. Each of the domains that I went through are weighted equally at 33.3%, and each domain has 3 subdomains, 2 of which, as mentioned earlier, look at policies and processes and strategies that have been put in place to address the various components of health inclusivity. The final domain, the spirit of implementation domain, has a slightly higher weighting in that it only includes 1 indicator, an output indicator, which aims to capture the implementation of those policies and strategies and whether they are actually being adopted and actioned upon. So a bit about our methodology. Phase 1 of the development of the index included a deep learning phase, an in-depth review of the literature around inclusivity to essentially develop an initial index framework. This was then taken in phase 2 to an expert panel who reviewed and provided expert guidance on how to finalize the index framework. In phase 3, we collected data across the 40 countries which were piloted in this initial year of the index to gather all the data required to assess inclusivity. And finally, in phase 4, that data was analyzed, it was rationalized, and it was weighted. Throughout the process, we must also acknowledge the support of the steering committee of which Charlotte is a member, who provided strategic counsel and guidance throughout the program of the development of the index. So, pharmacists in the index. It has well been established that there are global goals associated with the health workforce. Goal 3C of the Sustainable Development Goals, advocates for substantial increase in health financing to support a greater recruitment and development of the health workforce, particularly in developing countries. However, it goes without saying that that can come at a cost, particularly thinking about physicians and nurses, which can be a costly investment. Pharmacists are a central component of both the healthcare system, but also of communities. They play a substantial role in supporting the health and well-being of people at community levels, and therefore should be a focus when thinking about expanding the health workforce. In the Health Inclusivity Index, in Domain 2 precisely, the Inclusive Health Systems domain, we have an indicator that explores the density of pharmacy personnel per 10,000 people in a population. And this is based on an existing data source from the World Health Organization. Looking at that in context of the 40 countries we assessed, Japan tops the list and is in the top position for the density of pharmacy personnel at 18.9 pharmacists per 10,000 people in the population, closely followed by Sweden and Italy. In Japan, approximately 58% of pharmacists work in the community, 19% work in hospitals, and 23% in other settings. And we found that between 2000 and 2019, there was a huge shift and an increase in the density of pharmacists in Japan. And this was largely due to a switch to the Bungyo system, which decentralizes, which separates dispensing from prescribing, and many other countries use this approach, like the UK and others. On the other side of things, in the bottom 10, we had Kenya, Ukraine, Uganda, but we also found that across the index, all the high-income countries were in the top 20 position for pharmaceutical personnel, and all African countries were in the bottom 20. 92% of low and middle income countries were in the bottom 20, and similarly on the other side, 70% of high and upper middle income countries scored in the top 20 position. Overall, across the Health Inclusivity Index, there was definitely a differentiation in pharmaceutical personnel between across income levels and geographical regions. From a regional perspective, the Eastern Mediterranean had the highest density of pharmacists, whilst Africa had the lowest density. And similarly, when we look at income, we'd see a positive correlation between a country's income group or GDP per capita and the density of pharmacists that they have. So, pharmacists' role in supporting health inclusivity. The first important point here is that there is definitely a positive correlation between the density of pharmacists and the overall score on inclusivity. There are some exceptions to that trend, like the UAE, Jordan, and India, but overall there is a clear value in investing in health inclusivity, in pharmacy, the density of pharmacists to improve health inclusivity. So what does that mean? As mentioned, the Inclusivity Index explores various dimensions of inclusivity, some of which are outlined here. Pharmacists definitely have a role in providing information for self-care. Definitely based on the science, they have the knowledge and expertise to support individuals to be better advocates of their own health, understand what good health means. Person-centered care. There are set studies and bodies of research that definitely advocate for the value of person-centered care. Pharmacists are uniquely positioned within communities to be able to better understand the needs of their local communities and patients and tailor their service provision to those needs to improve health outcomes overall. And finally, health outreach programs. Again, this is an indicator that is explored in Domain 3 of the index. Pharmacists definitely can play a role in understanding patterns of health exclusion. To understand inclusion, as Charlotte mentioned, we do need to explore health exclusion, and that definitely happens at local and community levels. Pharmacists, again in their unique position, have a role in understanding what the patterns of health exclusion are and better tailor programs that seek out exclusionary barriers to support health for the most vulnerable people within populations. We will keep it short in terms of the findings. There is a much bigger body of work which can be explored in a few weeks, but ultimately we would love to hear your feedback. How do you think this resonates? What more can we do to explore the role of pharmacists in health inclusivity? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte and Emmy, for that. I appreciate the sort of segue into really understanding data behind this. As we heard from the first duo, there's a lot of focus on sustainability, right? So we know that systems level approaches have to be done in order to create this body of work that's going to be sustainable in the long run. I appreciate, as a data geek myself, the idea that we have to add stories to this, right? It's not an abstract thought because it actually impacts people every day. And so I appreciate how you've taken that systems level approach and applied data to actually, I always ask, what stories are these data telling us? What stories can we understand so we can understand the impact? What we know in health inequities is that oftentimes the people who are most impacted by our policies and our decisions and our programming rarely are actually informing that process. And so using people-first language to maintain dignity, using that community-based partnerships model so that we're actually amplifying and not assuming people's needs is going to be really important. And I'd like to pivot a little bit from talking about that sort of infrastructure and the key elements of data and using or amplifying the power and agency of people in communities to look at what's going on the practice side and education. So I'd like to invite for our next part of the program, Emma Paulino, and Dr. Terry Huang. Emma is a boss. That's how I usually introduce her. She is a practicing pharmacist at her own community pharmacy in Portugal. She's also the president of the Portuguese National Association of Pharmacies, ANF, and she has been very active within global work, particularly within FIP, and I really appreciate her lens because Emma is the person we're talking about here as the pharmacist working in the community. And it's really important for us to understand, again, going from that high-level sustainability, looking at those data and how we're partnering with people to then see how it impacts community pharmacists who we are calling on to be the most accessible practitioner, to go out there and do work, balancing their own work responsibilities, busy workflows, and having a lot of time to kind of navigate those waters and understand how they can be effective in that medium. We're also joined by Dr. Terry Huang, who is a professor and chair at the Department of Health Policy and Management at the City University of New York Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. He's done a lot of work in research and policy leadership in the area of obesity and chronic disease prevention. And what I like about Dr. Huang's approach is he has a very systems-oriented approach to community health. He's also he founded a new public health entrepreneurship platform called Firefly Innovations. So we welcome his perspective as well, as you will see him on the screen here. And we have been notified that we have over 200 participants here, both live and online, and so we welcome you all to the conversation. Before we take questions from the audience, I'd like to hear a little bit from Emma and Dr. Huang, and Emma and Terry about how do you translate what we're hearing here to the community practitioner who is called upon to do all these wonderful things, and to the space of education. I know as an educator, I often utilize the health impact assessment tool from the WHO in understanding how our policies are shaping our communities, and I'm very curious to see how we can integrate this as well when we're training the next generation of pharmacists to be more mindful of public health. So Emma, I'm going to get started with you, if you don't mind, just introducing your work and see how you bring this relevance to the everyday community pharmacist.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to participate in this very interesting panel, and thank you very much for your presentations. And I think that I can talk for everyone in this room when saying that we are very happy when someone in a presentation says that the pharmacists matter, and specifically that community pharmacists matter, because again, we are at the front line of care. But I believe it is important that we consider why pharmacists matter in this respect, and it's about location and competence. And we are talking about location, we are obviously also talking about the context, because we are a healthcare professional that people can access without making a prior appointment. We have large opening hours, and obviously we have all those opportunities. But we only matter when we use that location and context to seize every opportunity, and we only matter when we use our competence to take accountability for patient health outcomes. And I think that this is very important to consider. It's not only about the quantity of pharmacists or if they're nicely and sparsely dispersed by a certain geography, it's also about scope of practice and what we are doing, and if we are assuming that responsibility towards the patient. So I think that when we are considering how pharmacists contribute to inclusivity and equity, we must also consider these more qualitative aspects in some sort, but definitely they are the ones that make the difference. Theodore Roosevelt said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that it's not only about pharmacists and pharmacy teams being highly competent in terms of training, but it's what we do with those competences and whether we really seize the opportunities throughout the patient health journey to really make an impact, a positive impact on the population. And we've seen during this conference, and I'm sure we will see it in other sessions, a lot of results of those issues. We've seen vaccination, and we know that it increases coverage. We have data for that. We have situations where, for instance, in Portugal, we tested the population, and we were involved in mass testing for COVID, and we performed a study at the National Association of Pharmacies measuring the Gini index for the coefficient for inequality, and we saw a very significant reduction of over 50% in terms of the inequality of access to COVID testing, particularly in people in sparsely populated areas, elderly people, and people with poorer, so with lower income, lower income households. So we know that we are able to provide the impact, but I think that we must do much more in terms of the accountability that I was talking beforehand. And going straight to the point in terms of what you said, in terms of the time that we have to dedicate ourselves to these matters, well, I feel that often we feel threatened by technology and the efficiency in logistics. We feel that sometimes we are going to be replaced either by technology or by the efficient logistic monsters that we have around the world. Well, I think that we can, what we have to consider is the opportunities that technology and the efficiency of logistics brings to us to free our time to really contribute to to impacting on patient outcomes and do what we've just seen described here, which is really what the patient expects from us. So in a previous FIP conference, I mentioned that the $1 million question is not about how can I compete with Amazon or with technology. It's really how can I seize better this opportunity from technology and from efficiency in logistics to really make a bigger impact in patient outcomes and really feel integrated in the healthcare system.
That's it, we're done. No, I'm kidding. That was so inspiring. I really appreciate that lens. Dr. Huang, Terry, do you have any insights into how you see this translate in the world of education and public health?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So, I agree with all the panelists today. Clearly, pharmacists represent a tremendous clinical and community asset that hasn't been fully utilized to improve community and population well-being. I think COVID has demonstrated to all of us that pharmacists can play a critical role in helping the public health system reach deep into communities, including many communities that are historically underserved, where people have little access to good quality clinical care. I think that we do have a lot of challenges in translating this vision into real life practice, at scale. So first and foremost, pharmacists here in the US and probably in many other places around the world are not always recognized legally as clinical providers. That's something that folks are, really pushing to change, here in the United States. And so there are policy barriers currently that then have implications, for financial incentives, how pharmacists could be reimbursed for various interventions, not only in terms of, medication therapy management, but even moving towards expanded scope in terms of preventive screening, not just for COVID, but also for other social and behavioral risk factors, as well as even participating in multidisciplinary teams in delivering clinical as well as behavioral treatments. We do have limited research demonstrating the potential effectiveness in leveraging pharmacists in such expanded scope of work. It can be very effective and even cost effective, but there just isn't really the incentive in the structure in our current system, to actually scale that. And so these are all like opportunities that exist for pharmacists to play a much larger role in community-oriented primary care, in patient-centered medical homes. These, concepts that have been floating around for some time that we but we need to move beyond these barriers, policy and system barriers, in order to actually implement these actions.
Great, thank you for that. I think that, again, what we're hearing a lot of is there's importance in doing the actual programming work, engaging our partners, engaging our pharmacists, but what we're hearing from everybody really is this opportunity, right? How do we seize that opportunity in a sustainable manner, which we all in this room, doesn't matter your practice setting, doesn't matter whether you are practicing in a community or an educator or whatever, there has to be an innate effort for all of us to push pharmacy forward, to advance the scope of practice, to advocate for these changes, and integrate pharmacists instead of just talking to each other with public health across sectors so we can actually, what we heard loud and clear, get those data, right? Understand how our impact is being measured so we can use it to further policy advocacy, to further our agenda. I know in the US, I'm a public health pharmacist. I work with the public health ministry, the New York City Health Department. And one of the things we're focused on, for example, with the American Pharmacists Association is to push pharmacists to be providers and recognize so that we can start leveraging how that works in order to advance the scope of practice, find these pharmacists in these maybe lower density populations, because we got national data, but within those countries, a lot of times underserved communities don't have the same density of pharmacies around as other more resourced communities do. So I'm gonna take this back. Within the World Health Organization, I'm actually working with another professor, a colleague of Terry's, on commercial determinants of health, right? These sort of higher level systems sort of level of how some of these things shape our systems in terms of public health. So I heard you talk specifically about Haleon's efforts, particularly in partnerships. Any idea, any kind of thoughts about how that sort of social responsibility comes into play, and how do you find some of the sustainable efforts? So we're going to learn from these partnerships, but what are some key elements that you've found for sustainability that you've had to challenge in your work? Here, I'll pass this along.
Is that working? Right. So at Haleon, what we're looking to do, as you see from the partnerships that we have with the Economist unit here, that we're looking at this, we certainly can't do any of this alone. You know, we've just heard, haven't we, for the last 40 minutes of the value that a multidisciplinary team can bring to any of the challenges that we face. And I think as we bring this index beyond this world today in pharmacy, but into the broader awareness, what we're looking to do is then take particular partnerships around the world and actually then really delve more deeply into what the findings are, creating a multifunctional partnership to ensure that we can take those findings, start to really uncover what some of those deeper rooted, more on the ground barriers might be, such that we can then form those partnerships, develop interventions that we'll then take forward into real practice in some pilot markets. And I think it's really important here to say that we won't always get those things right, that we won't always be able to find the right answer straight away, but I think that combination of the work that we do concurrently with policy change, with the patient groups and the communication that we can offer and the support we can offer there, but importantly with the role of pharmacists, say whether that's in the training, the on-the-ground training, or the change management that will be required for those pharmacists on the ground, I think will be so important. So I think with that, Sarah, I just wanted to hand over if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, maybe just one build, and Charlotte talked about it earlier, is the importance of involving people who are vulnerable and who might not be as well included as they might be in really deeply understanding their human experience. What is it that is holding them back from being as included as they might be in everyday health, and how can we overcome those barriers and not jumping to assumptions? So a big component of what we want to do in coupling the data-led approach and the kind of science approach from the index, where we've got realms and realms of data, is also combining that with really deep lived experience research, understanding communities who aren't as included and hearing from them what's their lived experience, what's actually holding them back, and also their own ideas of what might make a difference. Because I think involving those communities that aren't as involved as they might be in understanding what would help them is going to be really important. So I'm looking forward to complementing the data-led understanding we've got from The Economist, but also that deep lived experience, insight from real people, and understanding from them what's holding them back and what could we do in sharing that more widely with yourselves and with other audiences, so that together we can think through what would really make a difference and what might be an efficient way of managing the barriers they experience.
Yeah, if I might just add, there is a huge economic cost that comes with not focusing on health inclusivity. And to your question about sustainability, often, and as Charlotte mentioned, health, the majority of our health is outside of the healthcare system. Only 70%, only 30% is within the formal healthcare system. And so this shift and this idea about moving away from the sciencing, focusing on the people and what individuals can do to drive their own health before it gets too late, before it becomes an issue that needs to be addressed within the healthcare system. There is a role definitely in improving self-care, improving the value of health at an everyday level, and ensuring that health is at the forefront of everyone's decision-making on an everyday basis, and that there is the opportunity for that to be the case.
Yeah, and what I would love to add to that is back to the role of the pharmacists at the community level. I think that, there is a collective knowledge of, what are some of these compounding factors that makes people either vulnerable or resilient. And so how can we tap into that fountain of knowledge and lift it up so that we can actually share it and we can improve our, our approach and our ability to address some of those issues. And also, is there a role for the pharmacists being sometimes the front lines of meeting people that present with not just a health problem, but all the different factors that are actually contributing to that. Also to lift that up and engage in the community and the stakeholder environment and be a driver for change and bring other parties closer to some of these issues, because you will be the first to see them and see these patterns that might emerge.
Well, I think building up on what has already been said, and I agree with all that has been said, I think that it is quite important that we move towards a system where we are able to feed this information that we collect at the forefront and into the system database so that we can share that information. And this is something that is still not happening in the vast majority of countries, is that integration of information so that we can collect even the determinants of health that contribute afterwards for the healthcare outcomes. We are very much focused on collecting medication history, diagnosis, and all other kinds of clinical interventions, because that's what usually is measured within the system. But this sort of information that can transform then into signals that can highlight that that person in particular is at a higher probability of or higher risk to something, then we can really act on the prevention stage. And instead of waiting for people to need the system and to need healthcare, that we can act proactively and at the beginning of the situation. So I think that, again, we need to work on integrating the information systems and to ensure that the workforce is capable of identifying and recording these determinants of health in a way that we can really signal the person before an event occurs, and we can act on the prevention phase instead of just reacting to a certain situation.
What I'm hearing is we need better data, and we need all of you to tell stories from those data in order to make this effective. Terry, any thoughts on that as well?
Well, this point is so poignant because I think it was in the New York Times today, there's just a damning article about the broken data system here in the United States in terms of public health surveillance. We frankly don't have a system that works well, that's fully integrated from the local to federal level. And that's talking about very basic, tracking of just COVID events or monkeypox events. So we're not even getting to the social determinants of health in this conversation. We got a lot of work to do, here in the US. So, but I completely agree that obviously greater visibility into not only the clinical determinants, but social and structural determinants in communities will give us a lot of insight in terms of how to organize preventive responses. I would say that, I think another piece that we haven't fully talked about today is training and thinking carefully and strategically about how to manage workflow and the introduction of new technologies into the pharmacy workflow. These are critical aspects that will need to be dealt with if we are to translate the kinds of ideals that we're talking about today into real life practice, at scale. I do think that there are, being the academic that I am, I think that there are opportunities for us to really scale up the research in this area. I think we need to create and tap into practice-based pharmacy networks to really begin to do some serious demonstration, project-like research type initiatives. And, when I actually did a little quick review of the literature in terms of what's out there, before today's session, I was really struck by how little there is. There's some early evidence, shall we say, in the US and Europe, in parts of Europe, to show, again, the effectiveness or cost effectiveness of certain interventions regarding medication therapy management, regarding behavior modification. But by and large, the knowledge base, is really quite limited. So, in support of the policy and systems changes that we're all advocating for here today, I do think that we also need to build more of that research evidence base to show what works, and it's not only like the what, it's also the how, right? The implementation strategies and factors that are going to be critical in different contexts to integrate pharmacists, more fully as a member, a key component of the multidisciplinary provider team. And what does that mean for communities? What does that mean for equity and inclusivity? Can we actually demonstrate, in real metrics, the gains, on those dimensions as a result of getting pharmacists, more involved? So I would just kind of, make it a little extra plea here that we also, think about how to include this research piece into the scope of work as we move forward.
Thank you, and I think that also helps answer a question, Emmy, that you posed about what do we do with this inclusivity index and how do we gain those pieces that might be missing. I want to see if anybody has any questions in our audience. That we do have a couple of folks. Oh, there's a question. They will bring a microphone to you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jean-François Desgagnés. I'm a pharmacist, community pharmacist in Quebec. French speaking, so my English is not that good, so I'm sorry. First of all, thank you. So interesting. About the index, for example, in Canada, it's such a big country. Is it possible to have certain data for provinces, for regions, for like indigenous people, communities? Because, in Quebec, we have lots of problems, for health system access for people who are far from centers. I live in a small community 5 hours east of Montreal, so even though where I live, I can assure you that my pharmacy is a big part of the city and the health system. So my question is it possible to have data for smaller things that big Canada? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. A really important question. The first thing to say is that the index does really explore data at national level. And I'm sure for some countries, particularly high-income countries, potentially Canada, that data does exist at subnational levels, county, province level, but not included in the Health Inclusivity Index. But you do raise a really important point. And for other countries, lower middle income countries, we did try to explore data at subnational and regional levels. But I think as a point has been raised quite consistently in this discussion, data is a real challenge, and particularly capturing consistent data across countries, across subnational levels is a real challenge. But something that we hope that can be captured in the future of the index, because as you say, at a national level, that isn't much value, but pharmacists' role does really exist at the community level, and how can we explore that using the data is probably a question for the future.
Well, I was thinking that maybe if we can have the equation for the index, if there is additional data, for instance, in provinces in Canada, that we can then build the index for our province or for our municipality. So I think it would be really interesting to get the equation for the index so that we, again, if we have the data, then we can just fill it in and we can have specific health inclusivity index for that specific region, and we can even compare across regions. That was just a preliminary thought, but I think that would be really interesting.
I'm hearing a collaboration come on.
Yeah, I was just going to say a great question, and one of the reasons we wanted to share the initial results is to get crowdsource ideas for how we deepen the insight from the index for the second year when we run it, because in the initial year, we were kind of doing a broad-based cut across 40 countries, and the data is at a national level. But indeed, what we have in mind for subsequent years is where do we need to deep dive more at a sub-national level amongst specific vulnerable communities. So it's great to have that input. And the other thing I just wanted to say is the index is enlightening both in the data that we've been able to analyze, but also in what it's exposed around the data that isn't available, and showing some things that aren't very well measured yet today. So, for example, in one of the barriers that I talked about earlier around bias and prejudice, what we found was that data in that area is very limited, actually. And so I think we've got a real opportunity now to learn from the first data cut we have coming out of the index, both what it shows us from the data we have been able to gather, but also what it reveals in terms of the data that isn't yet available. And we'd love to get your ideas on how we can use different data sources, including bringing in the role of pharmacists to help fill some of those data gaps where there isn't yet consistent data available around the world.
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting session. And look, I suppose I'd just like to point out that issues of health equity and inequity occur, as was referred to by our Canadian colleague, within countries as well as between countries. My name's John Jackson. I'm a research pharmacist in Melbourne, Australia, and I agree with the need for data. I appreciate the integrity of the system that's being developed and the like. But I also actually happen to run a not-for-profit pharmacy in inner Melbourne for disadvantaged communities, for refugees and asylum seekers. And can I ask we don't overlook the knowledge of people who are at the front line here and now, who work in this space every day. If we wait for the data, more people are hurt. More people are harmed, more people die. Let's actually listen to the people who are up the front line. One of the things I'd love to see us do is get the opportunity for social prescribing, because the answers to a lot of these problems is not in supplying medicines, it's addressing the social determinants of health, which we know are outside of the health system generally, so social prescribing, and I think pharmacists could do a wonderful job there. So it's more an observation than a question, but just if we can tap into the experience of the pharmacist front line. Thank you.
John, we appreciate that. I know that there might be some conversations that are going to continue, and please feel free to come up and ask some of those questions that you may have. But one of the things I would just like to wrap up and say is that I heard Emma also talk about accountability. And so I'm going to sort of challenge all of us here, both live and who are viewing, to a couple of things to think about in reflection after this session as you move through this conference. One is, how do we change some of the little things, and this has come up subtly here, is with people first language, right? That we need to hold the dignity of our communities within this. It's a big area of social determinants of health as well. So instead of saying our, hypertensive patient, it's the person with hypertension. How do we change that so we can start thinking about people when we're talking about this, which then leads us to really take the charge in thinking about pharmacists as community partners, right? We also have stories to tell, and in addition to the quantitative data that we've talked right now about needing for more granularity, more disaggregate data, and we can Google these terms, they're all very important for us to understand and research, but you also have access to qualitative data, to stories, to wonderful lived experiences that you serve every day as pharmacists. So when you leave here, what story are you going to tell? How are you going to leverage your experience in advocating for health inequities, against health inequities, for advocating for health equity, but also for advocating for pharmacists to be more involved in community partnership? One of the things I'd like to challenge all of us is to meet new people here at FIP. If you're sitting next to somebody you don't know, or somebody in front of you or behind you, to think about ways in which you can partner to tackle health inequities, to actually talk about social determinants of health, that we can also help inform some of these collaborations. Because again, oftentimes the people who are impacted by these policies and historically oppressive structural determinants of health are not not really there informing some of these solutions. And so we need to be, I think that was pretty loud and clear from everybody here today, that we need to partner with those communities that we serve. And the other thing I will challenge you with is to think about how to get involved in your own jurisdiction with advocating for policy for pharmacists to be able to be effective community partners. So I really want to thank all of our panelists here. I know I gave you a lot of reflection, but we have time in Seville as you sip on any beverage of choice to think about these questions, create new networks and partnerships here at the conference, and take this work and inspiration moving forward, not just leaving it here. So lots to think about. Thank you so kindly for our panelists, a big round of applause, and for all of you to join us. So I think we're going to hang around for a couple of minutes, but please feel free to move about in the space, introduce yourselves to us and to new people, and we look forward to chatting with you. Thank you.